To update the database information using code, there are two possibilities. We can do so using the business component of the transaction through its insert, update, or delete methods, or instead of insert or update with save, or even insert or update. Or we do it exclusively within a procedure through the new command. For each command with direct assignment of the attributes to be modified, and the delete command within a for each to delete the record in which we are positioned. The huge difference between these two alternatives is that while the first one is strongly linked to the logic of the transaction, because the rules are triggered, including the control of duplicates and referential integrity, in the second one, the update is independent of the transaction, so no rule will be triggered, and the only control that will be performed is the duplicate control. In this way, we could assign a non-existent category, which the program will not check. However, the database will check it, and the execution will be interrupted with an error screen in the user's browser. So let's continue to look into the first alternative, that of business components. To insert a new tourist attraction using the business component, it's enough to create a variable of this type, assign a new memory space to it. It's not essential, but it's a good practice to make sure that no matter what has happened before, the variable at this time will be completely new. Assign a value to all the elements of the business component corresponding to attributes in the table. If the identifier is auto-numbered, there's no need to assign it a value. The database will do it when we insert it. If no value is assigned to any attribute in the table, it'll remain empty or null. This is not a problem in general, except for the case in which the attribute is a foreign key and does not admit nulls. There, if we try to insert it, we will get a reference integrity failure error. Finally, after loading the business component structure, the only thing left to do is to invoke the insert method, and commit if we want when the insertion is successful. This is the equivalent to using the save method. Since, in this case, the business component variable is in insert mode, it'll try to insert and not do an update. Remember that among the standard variables of every transaction, we will find the one named mode. This variable contains at all times the mode in which we're executing the transaction. In order to handle its values at a high level, the Genexus module incorporates the TRN mode enumerated domain, which can take the four values: insert, update, delete, and display, which indicates that the information is being displayed, but nothing will be done with it. When the transaction is opened, if we don't specify it to receive mode and identifier as parameters, it does so in insert mode. That's why the fields are empty. When we exit the identifier, a search is made for a record with the value we left it in this case 0. And since it can't be found, the transaction remains in insert mode. If there were rules conditioned with if insert, they would be triggered. After saving, it informs that the data has been inserted. Also, the form has been emptied again, which means that the transaction has been left in insert mode again. As we will see, this will not happen when we insert through the business component, which will remain in update mode. If we now choose an existing value in the database for the identifier, for example, 5, which is the one that has just been inserted, when we leave the field, the transaction brings its values loaded in the fields on screen and automatically remains in update mode. We can change something, for example, remove the category, leaving it empty, assuming that we accept nulls in that foreign key. After confirming, we're informed that the record was successfully updated. But, also, we're positioned on the same record in update mode. Here, the business component will behave in the same way. Let's see what happens when working with the business component. The mode method allows us to check which mode it's in. It's read-only. If we define an attraction variable and check what mode it's in before we do anything else, we'll see that it's in insert mode. Every time we restart it with new, it'll be in that mode. Then we have to enter the values we want to give to the attributes of the associated table, only those we don't want to leave empty. Throughout this time, the business component variable will remain in insert mode. But what happens once the insert method is executed? The insertion in the database will be attempted, executing the corresponding rules. If the process is successful, all the elements of the business component variable are loaded with the corresponding values. Since attraction ID is auto-numbered, we get the value that was assigned to it in the database, and the attributes that are inferred in the transaction are also loaded here, so they may be queried. In addition, the mode of the business component variable is changed to update. On the other hand, if what we wanted was to modify the tourist attraction of ID2 by changing its category to tourist site, it was enough to load in the attraction business component variable the values of the record with primary key 2 of the attraction table. We did this using the load method, which automatically left the variable in update mode if that record existed. Then, assign a value to all the elements of the business component to be modified. In this case, only category ID, as we want the others to keep the value they had. And lastly, invoke the update method to perform this update in the database, and commit if the operation was successfully executed. Once the update is done, the category name element, which is inferred in the transaction, remains in the variable with the correct value. The variable remains in update mode. Here too, it's equivalent to using the save method. In this case, since the business component variable after the load was left in update mode, the save will try to update and not insert. If what we wanted was to change the category of all the tourist attractions in Beijing that were monuments, to assign them the tourist site category, then it was enough to place the previous code inside a for-each command that selects only the desired records. And then the load is made for each attraction ID of those records. Thus, first the load of that of ID2 is made, the variable remains in update mode, then its category ID is modified. And when executing the update method, the record in the table is updated and the variable remains with the corresponding category name. And then the same for the next record that meets the conditions, that is, the one with ID 4. On the other hand, if we wanted to delete a tourist attraction, for example, the one with the identifier 2, we first had to load it into the business component variable, after which it remains in update mode, and then use the delete method, which then deletes it from the table, and leaves the variable loaded with the data, but in delete mode. Then it'll be checked for success so as to perform a commit. But what if we wanted to eliminate all the monument type attractions in Beijing? Again, we would place the attractions one by one with the for-each command and load them with the load action, and then use the delete method to remove them. This was quite simple in a single-level business component. But how do we work with a two-level one? How do we insert, update, and delete lines? This will be explained in the next video.